So obviously, a lot of the discussion surrounding Metaphor ReFantazio has been around how similar or different the game is to Atlus's other pillar IPs like Persona and Shin Megami Tensei. Now that Metaphor ReFantazio is out for everybody to play on Windows PC or Xbox, I added a link to the video description for you guys to check out and purchase Metaphor ReFantazio now. A free demo is out now, which will allow you to play the entire prologue of the game, and the best thing is your save file transfer over into the main game after you purchased it. Today, I am here to share my opinion as to why Metaphor ReFantazio stands proudly next to both SMT and Persona as its own thing. If you've been following me for a while, you know that I have been extremely excited for Metaphor ReFantazio's release, and I am honored to share that this video is sponsored by Atlus West. Let's get right into it. So let's start with Persona. So we'll talk about what's similar and what's different in Metaphor when it's compared to Persona. And then we'll jump into Shin Megami Tensei and we'll discuss what's similar and different with SMT. And then we'll talk about both combined together, and it should give us an idea of what's Metaphor when compared to these two titles and why does it stand with no shame next to these other two amazing IPs by Atlus. So first of all, the awakening scene. So obviously you must have seen it. I made a YouTube shorts comparing the awakening of Joker in Persona 5 to the protagonist in Metaphor, and the awakenings are very much similar. So in Metaphor, you have archetypes, which are basically what some people would call Persona equivalents or demons equivalent. We'll get back to that in just a second. So obviously the awakenings are certainly one of the things that I would consider similar in both Persona and SMT. After all, some of the Persona creators are working on Metaphor, with Mr. Katsura Hishino leading Metaphor here, the development of the game, and he has been in charge of all recent Persona games, Persona 3, 4, and 5. Same thing for the composer, Shoji Meguro. He's been in charge of these games, and none other than character designer and artist Shigenori Soejima has also been involved in Persona, so it's clear that there's going to be similarities, and yes, when it comes to the awakenings, it shows. Another similarity, it's undeniable, the bonds. The bonds that you can create when you meet a new character in Metaphor, you talk to them, and it creates this bond that you can develop with the character. And when you unlock a new bond, it gives access to a new archetype, a new class of archetype, if you will, or a new job, because some people like to call archetypes a job system here. This is kind of similar to Persona Social Links, but it's structured differently and the rewards that you get are different. So I'm gonna say it's similar, but it's kind of different at the same time. The one thing that has to be mentioned when we're talking about Persona and comparing it to Metaphor, the user interface. Have you seen the UI in Metaphor? Whoo boy, yes, it looks absolutely amazing, and it's obviously very similar to what you're gonna find in Persona. It looks different, but it's similar in the fact that both are extremely sexy. So if you look at Persona 5 or you look at P3 Reload or even P4 Golden, you're gonna notice that menus and UIs are always extremely flashy and gorgeous. It's exactly the same thing in Metaphor, and I'm gonna say Metaphor is probably one of the best ones that they did so far, so I am here for it. Another little thing that I noticed with my time with Metaphor is the rooms in certain dungeons that you can find are basically safe rooms from Persona 5 specifically, so that in terms of gameplay is also very similar. But there's a ton that is different, and let's get into it. So what's different in Metaphor than Persona? Academia. So Academia is basically what people call the Velvet Room of Metaphor, right? Your Velvet Room in Persona would be Academia in Metaphor. But to me, very different. Very different. So different vibe, different look, different character in it, very different. Party members can't enter Academia, they can't see it either. So in that sense, it's similar. But it's different in the sense that there is no fusion system, which is a staple of the Persona series. You can spend Mag, the currency of Metaphor, to change your archetype. So let's say I have Stroll here on my team and he's initially a warrior. I want him to become a healer now that I unlocked the healer archetype through a bonding event. I can spend a little bit of currency and here you go, Stroll's now a healer. So it's very different in a gameplay sense to the Velvet Room in Persona. It's gonna make things refreshing and I'm really here for it. Now speaking of archetypes, archetypes are in Persona. I've heard archetypes are personas. Archetypes aren't. They're very different. There's over 40 archetypes in Metaphor. Yes, some of them can evolve like personas can, but the big thing is in Persona, you have your protagonist who can equip every persona. That's awesome. But your other party members are locked with their initial persona, which that is how they make the protagonist special in Persona. Cool, but in Metaphor, it's different because you can equip every of the 40 plus archetype on any of your party members, which means that customization options are going to be endless, and that to me is a very good thing. You're not stuck to one archetype. I played the demo, oof, that's a lot, but I played the demo 3 times on 3 different platforms, and I tried different combinations of archetypes, and I already know I'm going to have a blast with this. Once again, that's going to be very refreshing when compared to Persona. Another little thing that is kind of different, but not really, is in Persona games, you fight demons, you fight personas in dungeons, you fight shadows. Sometimes you're going to fight against humans. Well, in Metaphor, you fight against creatures in the world, but you also fight against humans? But David, you said it's different. Well, in Metaphor, humans aren't really humans. They're different. They're actually monsters, and you, as the character, aren't human. So hey, here's your difference. You're both fighting humans sometimes, but not the same type of humans. So I just wanted to point that out. Thought it was a little funny here. The big thing is, the tone and setting of Persona games has been around high school setting, bunch of teenagers. I've heard a lot of Atlas and Persona fans say, hey, it's cool, we've enjoyed a lot of games, well, 5 games in a high school with teenager setting here in Persona games. Well, in Metaphor, it's completely different. There's no high school in sight, you're not in Tokyo, you're in a completely different place, completely different time, completely different setting, and for that reason alone, I could say that Metaphor is completely different. But it really is different because none of that stuff that you find in all Persona games when it comes to the world and setting is here in Metaphor. It's completely different, completely original. You're in the kingdom of Uchronia. There's an emphasis on race and different tribes and stuff. Completely different from anything Persona, and to me, that's a good. Again, coming from a Persona fan. Alright, let's talk about my baby here, mainline Shin Megami Tensei. So when it comes to SMT, there really isn't much similarities, if I'm being honest. It's mostly different stuff. It's completely different than SMT. Oh, but David, what about the combat? Let's start with that, y'all, the combat. So obviously, when you jump into battle here, when you jump into a squad battle in Metaphor, you are going to find that it is similar to the press turn combat system that you're going to find in Atlas classics like Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne or, hey, recent release SMT5 Vengeance, which is peak, by the way. So obviously, when you are in a squad battle, when you are in a real battle, it's kind of similar. And I'm saying similar because you have press turn icons. If you explode an enemy weakness, you get an additional icon. If you block an enemy attack, etc., right? You guys know the drill. We've been playing that system for years. But there is a twist. There is the twist, again, of archetypes, which are very different than demons that you have here on Battle With You. You have a field system or a formation system. You can put some of your allies in the front row so they can deal more damage, or you can put them in the back row so they can maybe deal less damage but take less damage. So let's say I have a healer. My healer is obviously going to be in the back row. That way the healer is safe and the healer is safe to heal my other characters, my front row characters, you know? If I have a warrior with a huge ass sword, I want my warrior to deal as much damage as possible. So he is going to be front row, obviously. But the elephant in the room has to be addressed, and it's the fact that Metaphor doesn't have the pure press turn system. It has a hybrid combat system, which I can't stress enough how good it is. When you see an enemy on field, you can analyze the enemy to see, is the enemy lower leveled, is the enemy the same level or higher level than you? You can try and sneak behind the enemy to get the first strike, because if you do, you're gonna have the first turn and advantage in battle, and that's something that you can find in certain games. But you can fully beat lower leveled enemies on field, and that feels extremely rewarding. But let's say I am exploring a dungeon, and early on in the dungeon I'm gonna attack with action-based combat the enemies to lower their defense a little bit and get the advantage in the first turn of the battle, of the squad battle, the turn-based battle. But once I've been exploring this dungeon for a long time and that I leveled up enough, these enemies, I might be able to fully defeat them with the action-based combat. So this hybrid is extremely fun, extremely addictive. I didn't think I would enjoy it that much because I am a huge fan of the press turn system, but I really do. It's awesome. And once again, something that makes the combat system of Metaphor stand out next to SMT for sure. The big other thing that is completely different in Metaphor versus SMT specifically is the story focus. Metaphor is extremely story heavy. It's more story heavy than some of the Persona games from what I've played at this point. But again, I've just played the early section of the game. It could change. It's way more along the lines of a Persona game when it comes to how story heavy it is. It's heavy. There is a lot of cutscenes, there is a lot of dialogues between characters, there is interactions at bonfires, there is interactions when you explore a dungeon and all that stuff. In SMT, there's really little dialogue and there's not an emphasis on story in most SMT titles, which again makes Metaphor stands out quite a bit next to SMT, and not in a bad way at all. So if I talk about the differences of both, right? So let's talk about what Metaphor does that both SMT and Persona do differently. So the first thing that we obviously talked about before is it's completely different in setting and tone. Most moves and skills and spells that you can use in battles are named completely differently. So I'm using most because some of them are exceptions to the rule. There is Tarukaja here, which is in most SMT and Persona titles. Rakukaja, stuff like that, you know? Buffs and debuffs are named similarly, but other spells are named differently and have completely different and original animations as well, which makes it feel more refreshing. The game story is narrated as if the game was a book, a storybook, and that feels very unique and very different to other games. I mentioned how the soundtrack was composed by Shoji Meguro, which worked on a lot of SMT and Persona titles. That's a good thing because Mr. Meguro is a very talented composer. Well, it shows because the soundtrack of Metaphor has been amazing so far, and it definitely sounds different than anything that we've seen before in SMT or Persona, but it still feels very natural and very fitting for this setting, which is very different. The exploration feels a little bit different too. When you're exploring areas, generally they're larger than what you're gonna find in Persona, more along the lines of recent SMT titles like an SMT5 for example. But it's different in the sense that sometimes there is some little stealth sections, but it's not very big stealth sections, right? It's little things here and there. For example, early on, you have to stealth walk next to a dragon that is sleeping. Make sure you don't awake the dragon, that way you don't get beat down. Or there is another section where rocks are falling from this grotto that you're in. You have to run very fast. You know, it's very interactive and very different. Again, early on versus SMT and Persona. There seems to be a big focus on discovery and travels. You have the gauntlet runner that you can use to travel from a place to another. Very big emphasis on travel. You're gonna explore a huge kingdom. In terms of gameplay, I talked about the archetypes before. Archetypes, over 40 archetypes, they're not demons in SMT. You don't negotiate with them to recruit them. You unlock them through bonding events. You don't recruit them in battle either. Like in Persona, there's no shuffle time, anything like that. It's completely original system here, and that is very good. A gameplay mechanic that has been changed from SMT and Persona I found myself enjoying quite a bit when I played the demos of Metaphor here, but I've heard a lot of positive buzz around that as well, is that if your protagonist dies in battle, it's not the end. Obviously in SMT, you recruit demons. If the Nahobino dies in SMT5, well, your demons are like, bro, you're not powerful enough, and they're gone. So it kind of makes sense that it's game over. In Persona, it's debatable. Well, in Metaphor, if you die, too bad. The battle keeps going, and in a gameplay sense, it's very fun, and it's something that I've been asking for in an Atlas RPG for a long time. So if you are someone who said before that Metaphor was too similar to Persona and Shin Megami Tensei, what do you think now after playing the demo and watching my video? If you have not played the demo though, please do yourselves a favor and download it now, or simply click the link in the video description to purchase the game now. IGN gave the game a 9 out of 10, GameSpot gave the game a 10 out of 10, Metacritic is currently at 94, so there's a reason why I'm praising this game front to back. From all we've seen, from all that I've played of Metaphor, which isn't much more than the demo, I can safely say with full confidence that it's all that I've wanted from an Atlas medieval RPG, and I'm super stoked to say that. Thank you all so much for watching today's video. Thank you so much to Atlas West for sponsoring this video, and I'm back to playing Metaphor.